America is the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Welcome to our new special, Politics by Faith, the Heavens and God's Grand Design. Today's special started because our producer has been really wanting to do another special on aliens, because a while back we did a special on aliens, and I think it's still our most watched episode we've ever done. So producer Matt's been looking for an angle on aliens, and then Barack Obama and Donald Trump gave us one, so we took it. But this special is not entirely about aliens. We're going to broaden it out a bit. But it's also about aliens and finding some peace and perspective on aliens, but also on God's creation of the cosmos. Here's what started it all. This is Barack Obama on a podcast just the other day.
Are aliens real?
They're real, but I haven't seen them, and they're not being kept in, what is it?
Area 51?
Area 51. There's no underground facility, unless there's this enormous conspiracy, and they hid it from the President of the United States.
What was the first question you wanted answered when you became president?
Where are the aliens?
Where are the
Now, Barack Obama later clarified in a tweet. And in this tweet, he said, statistically, the universe is so vast that the odds are good that there's life out there. But he saw no evidence that there was, and no evidence that we've made contact with them or them with us. Really, he said. So then the current president wrote in response to that he will release all information about alien and extraterrestrial life, unidentified aerial phenomena, and unidentified flying objects, and any and all information connected to these highly complex but extremely interesting and important matters. Alien people got very excited. I don't think much is going to be released because, if I may, I don't upset anybody, but there's no such thing as aliens. Or I don't think there's such thing as aliens. And I'll tell you why. Here's my argument. I think Obama got this one wrong, as many other people use that same line of thinking, but they have it backwards. One of the mottos of my radio show forever has been perhaps the opposite is true. We are told something, and if you are told something, you should think, well, hold on, maybe the opposite of that thing is true. The former president, Obama, said statistically, the universe is so vast that the odds are good there's life out there. I believe that's backwards. Statistically, life is so impossible to exist here for us. Statistically, life is impossible to exist here. So there's no way it also exists anywhere else. That's my argument. I'll give you an example. Proteins are molecules made up of amino acids. You may remember back in high school, the building blocks of life, amino acids. A protein can have 20, it could have as many as 150 amino acids that need to be perfectly aligned in order to function. That means there are 10 to the 195th power number of possible combinations of amino acids. For comparison's sake, there are 10 to the 80th power number of atoms in the universe. Okay, so that's 10 to the 80th power, 10 to the 195th power. So the chance of bacterium evolving from proteins is something like 10 to the 165th thousandth power. It's mathematically impossible. Our next guest, Stephen Meyer, can give us more science as the impossibility of randomness being the answer to life. But I think you see the issue here, right? So Barack Obama says statistically there has to be life out there. No. Statistically, it's impossible that life exists here. But it does, which points me to a creator who made us. And the creator has told us nothing about life existing anywhere else. I think people should focus less on the existence of life out there and focus more on the unseen aspects of life here. That is the soul, spiritual warfare, angels, demons here, which the Bible does talk about, which God does tell us about. I'll share another story about science and God. There's a Yale professor, David Galertner, top-notch, first-class, brilliant computer science professor. By default, as we were all been told, we need to believe in Darwinism. Every scientist, every reasonable and rational person is supposed to believe in Darwinism. We'll debunk that more in just a moment. But he said he was swayed away from Darwinism. One reason was because of Stephen Meyer, our next guest. But he used math to get there. Now, he said, ignoring the fact that all major genetic mutations prove fatal, so mutation can't explain life, but let's say it could, right? Let's say things mutate better. He says, well, let's use math. Okay, remember Obama's conclusion is statistically there must be life out there. Gluttner says, and I don't understand the math of this quote at all, just to be clear, but that's part of my point, right? Gluttner says, suppose then that every bacterium that has ever lived, bacterium, contributes one mutation before its demise to the history of life. This is a generous assumption. Most bacteria pass on their genetic information unchanged, unmutated. Mutations are the exception. Okay, so we're making a lot of generalities, right? In any case, there have evidently been, in the whole history of life, around 1,040 bacteria yielding around, not 1,040, 10 to the 40th power bacteria, yielding around 10 to the 40th power mutations. That's a very large number of chances at any game. But given that the odds each time are 1 to the 10 to the 77th power, again, that's almost the number of atoms in the universe, it's not large enough. The odds against blind Darwinian chance having turned up even one mutation with the potential to push evolution forward are 10 to the 40th times 1 over 10 to the 77th, which is 10 to the 40th tries. Your odds of success of each time are 1 in 10 to the 77th, which equals 1 in 10 to the 37th power. In practical terms, those odds are zero. Zero odds of producing a single promising mutation in the whole history of life. Okay, 10 to the 37th power. That's a big number. How big of a power? All the Earth's beaches. Okay, think of all the beaches. You go to the beach. Remember going to the beach? You pick up a handful of sand. You're like, I wonder how many grains of sand are in my hand. If you think about all the beaches in the earth, it's believed there are 10 to the 21st grains of sand. So the chances of a bacterium mutation producing a single promising contribution in the progress and advancement in history of life is the chances of you picking out one particular piece of sand in twice as many grains of sand that exist in the world. Zero. The existence of life is so impossible. And for me, it points to a creator. Now, why can't more people admit this? Well, Gluttner says that people stick to Darwinian thinking because it's a shorthand for their entire secular, godless worldview. And if they abandon Darwin, then they might have to say that a creator exists, and then everything else they believe has to crumble with it. And if you go a little deeper, if a creator exists, then I may have to live my life differently. And I don't want to risk that. So it's better just to believe in Darwin, and we'll all say we're smart. You believe in Darwin? Yeah, me too. We're both so smart. Gluttner says you take your life in your hands to challenge it intellectually, challenge Darwinism. They will destroy you if you challenge it because they have to defend themselves and their worldview. What I've seen in their behavior intellectually and at colleges across the West is nothing approaching free speech on this topic. It's a bitter, fundamental, angry, outraged rejection of intelligent design, which comes nowhere near scientific or intellectual discussion. I've seen it happen again and again, says David Gluttner. He said that faith in Darwin and Darwinism is a replacement religion for troubled souls who desperately need something, but they can't go to God, or they don't want to go to God. I want to bring this in this segment because we got Stephen Meyer here and I want to spend good time with him. We're going to end the show with Psalm 19. We'll go into more detail on this, but Psalm 19, many scholars have called this the most beautiful poem in the world. C.S. Lewis said that this psalm reflects more than any other the beauty and splendor of the Hebrew poetry found in the Psalms. David wrote in Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Nothing in here about aliens, by the way. Day unto day utters speech, and night unto night reveals knowledge. There's no speech nor language where the voice is not heard. Oh, I can't wait to get to that one at the end of the show. Their line has gone out throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. We will break that down in the final segment, but just know that God created everything. And the more that we disconnect ourselves from him, the creator, the worse we are. The more we commune with him, and the more we know God, the better our lives will be. the great Dr. Stephen Meyer, coming up next right here on The First TV.
In a culture told that science has made belief in God obsolete, one scientist stepped into the debate. Dr. Stephen C. Meyer, philosopher of science, former geophysicist, and New York Times best-selling author, has spent decades examining the evidence behind life in the universe. His groundbreaking book, Return of the God Hypothesis, reignited one of the biggest conversations of our time, arguing that modern discoveries in physics, cosmology, and biology point not away from God, but toward him. The book sparked national media attention, major podcast appearances, and wide-ranging debate, including conversations with thinkers like Jordan Peterson, and became a bestseller for its bold case that science and belief are not enemies but allies. Now that conversation expands beyond the page. From the ideas that challenged a generation comes a cinematic experience exploring the biggest question of all: where did everything come from? This is The Story of Everything, in theatres April 30th.
What an honor to talk to a man who was instrumental in my becoming a Christian, my early apologetics reading back when I was an atheist, when by default I believed in whatever Darwin said as well, because I'm smart. And that is the man who is focused on right there, Dr. Stephen Meyer, author of many books, including Return of the God Hypothesis. And that was a clip from his new movie coming out, TheStoryOfEverything.Film. To watch the trailer, TheStoryOfEverything.Film. Dr. Meyer, how are you, sir?
Very well. Thanks for having me on this morning.
My pleasure. It's wonderful to talk to you. One thing that broke my atheism and my default support of Darwinism was the fact that behind the scenes, Darwinists know, and they talk to each other, and they admit that there's massive holes to his theory. And I love this point that you've made, that things we've learned since Darwin, even by Darwin's own standards, like if he were around today, he may not believe in Darwinism. Am I reading that right?
Well, there is a crisis in evolutionary theory, evolutionary biology. You're absolutely right. Now, 10 years ago, there was a conference at the Royal Society in London, arguably the oldest and most august scientific body in the world. And it was convened by a group of evolutionary biologists, evolutionary theorists who are dissatisfied with the standard textbook version of the theory we all learn, so-called neo-Darwinism, the modern version of Darwin's theory. And they were dissatisfied because the prime mechanism of Darwinian evolution, or neo-Darwinian evolution, is the mechanism of natural selection acting on random genetic variations. And these evolutionary biologists had long recognized that that mechanism had very limited creative power. It does a nice job of explaining small-scale variations, what we might call adaptation, but it does a very poor job of explaining large-scale innovation, therefore essentially macroevolution. It doesn't explain the origin of what we sometimes call morphological innovation, the origin of new form. And this conference was convened over a several-day period in London. About 20% of the people who were there were either openly or tacitly supportive of intelligent design. The others were evolutionary biologists who were trying to come up with a new theory, new mechanisms that could supplement or complement the standard mutation selection mechanism. But one of the conveners of the conference afterwards said, "We've done a great job." She said that the conference was characterized by a lack of momentousness. Effectively, we've done a great job of characterizing the problems with the standard theory without coming up with anything fundamentally new that would solve the problems that the theory has.
Amazing. When did this default start, that if you're a smart scientist, then you have to believe in what Darwin said?
Well, it's interesting. There's a complicated history. Darwinism was not immediately received well in a lot of biological circles. The top paleontologist of Darwin's time and one of his own mentors, I'm talking about Louis Agassiz, the great Swiss paleontologist who had gone to Harvard, and one of his mentors, Adam Sedgwick. Neither of them accepted Darwin's theory. Agassiz's reasons were very easy to understand. he was a paleontologist, and he understood that the fossil record did not show the kind of gradual morphing of one thing into another, less complex things into more complex things. Instead, the fossil record showed abrupt appearance of novel form. So instead of the tree-like picture that Darwin used to depict the history of life, the history of life looked much more like an orchard of separate trees, and with big discontinuity as the characterizing effect. But eventually, at least the idea of common descent caught on. But even in the early 20th century, there were a lot of dissenters about whether or not natural selection had any creative power. That problem was supposedly solved in the period of the 1930s, 40s, and 50s with the advent of something called neo-Darwinism and the use of mutations to supplement the natural selection mechanism. But when we began to think about and learn about the information-bearing properties of DNA and realize that if you start randomly changing essentially a digital bit string, which is what DNA contains, digital information, you're going to degrade the information that you have long before you generate any new and useful information for building something fundamentally new, even at the level of new proteins. And so these problems have been there all along. They've ebbed and flowed in terms of awareness among biologists, but today I think the awareness of the inadequacy of the mutation selection mechanism is very acute. It does not provide an adequate mechanism for generating the information you need to build fundamentally new forms of life. And that's the big message of contemporary biology. If you want to build new form, you've got to have new information. Post Watson and Crick, the 1950s, 1960s, it's been a new day in biology. The information age has come to biological science. And if you can't account for information, you can't account for biological form. And the neo-Darwinian mechanism of mutation and selection, which we all still learn about in high school and college, is unfortunately, for the proponents of the theory, completely inadequate to meet that challenge.
Okay. We only have so much time, but I hate to, you said that brilliantly, but it's so important. I want to spend another minute on it. So to dumb it down, we talked a bit about amino acids earlier. So if you had a chain of amino acids, let's say, what do you think, like 50 maybe? You're saying if we have 50 amino acids, if you take one out and replace it with some other amino acid, that doesn't work. You can't just do that. And what are the chances of having 50 amino acids line up perfectly? And then I guess the neo-Darwinists would say, well, we need mutations, so we need changes in this 50 lineup of amino acids that then produce a different animal or something. Is that their argument?
Yeah, let me rough that out a little bit with a little more detail. So, yeah. But you're on the right track. There is some variability in backing up yet again. Amino acids are the subunits of proteins. Proteins do all the important jobs within the cell. They catalyze reactions at much faster rates. Those are enzyme proteins, much faster rates than would otherwise occur. They build the parts of molecular machines, and there are a host of molecular machines inside cells: turbines, sliding clamps, rotary engines. It's extraordinary the level of nanotechnology and complexity that we're finding inside life. And they also the proteins also help process the information on the DNA molecule. So they do lots of important jobs. If you want to build a new form of life, you've got to have new proteins, because new forms of life require new cell types. New cell types require new proteins and distinctive types of proteins to service them. So and then the other key fact is that proteins are built from the instructions on the DNA molecule. The DNA molecule codes for assembling proteins. So if you want to build a new protein in a living system, you'll have to mutate the DNA and the code that's in the DNA to build a new protein. And this is where the rub comes in. DNA contains a 4-character digital code, 4 chemical subunits that are functioning like alphabetic characters in a written language, or like zeros and ones in a section of software. And if you think about software, it will give you a good handle on the problem of trying to generate new protein form from random changes in the code in the DNA. Think about if you have a section of software and you start to change the zeros and ones randomly, what's going to happen is that you will inevitably degrade and destroy the information in that software long before you will have changed it enough to have a code for building a new software program or app or operating system. That you're going to start with it at an island of function, and you're going to fall into an abyss long before you rise to another island of function. And this is exactly what we have found when we experiment with the fundamental structures in life called protein folds. If you start changing the DNA randomly, the proteins that you have may abide a small amount of change, but they will quickly degrade to non-function long before you will have changed them enough to generate a fundamentally new protein form called a protein fold. So you have the same problem of starting on a functional plateau, dropping into an abyss long before you get to something useful. And that's in essence the information problem, because you've got to start with informational code in DNA and change it enough to get something new and functional, some new information that will build something functional. And what we found experimentally is that process of mutation will degrade long before it builds something useful.
Brilliant. Okay, so that's biology. We just yesterday got back from Arches National Park in Utah, and all over the park it says hundreds of millions of years it took these arches to form. It's hundreds of millions of years, it's thrown out there everywhere. And I guess that's the biologist answer, or the Darwin's biologist answer as to how those mutations could occur, right? They're like, oh, well, 100 million years. But what is a creationist rebuttal when looking at geology? Do you do that as well, or are you mostly only a biologist?
Well, there's a time dimension of this. It doesn't depend on refuting or throwing out the standard geological time scale. It happens that whether you think the Earth is very old or whether it's very young, there's not nearly enough time to build new functional information, the new functional information required to build the new animals that appear in the fossil record. I wrote a whole book about an event called the Cambrian explosion, which is the event in the history of life where you have several dozen new body plans arising abruptly in the fossil record. To build those body plans, you need new organs and tissues. To build those organs and tissues, you need new cell types. To build the new cell types, as we've just been saying, you need lots of new proteins, and that means lots of new genetic information. There's a branch of evolutionary theory called population genetics. And that branch of evolutionary theory is mathematical. It allows you to calculate how much evolutionary change you should expect you would have reason to expect to occur within a given amount of time if you know certain parameters, like the generation time from parents to offspring in a given population. How many organisms were in that population, and what is the mutation rate? If you know those factors, you can calculate the amount of evolutionary change that should take place in a given amount of time. And what we find time and time again is that evolutionary biology is encountering what they call a waiting times problem, that the time allowed, the time it takes to generate new innovations, new structures in the fossil record is far too short to have been produced by the mutation selection mechanism. In other words, the math of the mathematics of neo-Darwinism is showing that the mechanism of the neo-Darwinian mechanism is inadequate to produce the amount of change that we see happening and arising abruptly in the fossil record. And that's assuming the standard geological time scale of a 4.5 billion year history for life on Earth. For all the major evolutionary changes or innovations that we see in the history of life, there's not enough time for them to occur by the Darwinian mechanism, and that's using the Darwinian math to make those calculations.
Yep. I love it. we got about 2 minutes. I got 2 more questions. I got to ask you about the movie. One's about the movie, but before that, this special's technically about aliens. So I got to ask you an alien question.
Okay.
Do you think aliens exist?
I'm skeptical about alien existence, but I will not go to the mat one way or another. What I do find interesting is that many evolutionary biologists are now positing an alien designer theory. They recognize that life on Earth is so improbable. The origin of life on Earth was so improbable given the conditions on Earth that it must have happened elsewhere. And also, it shows evidence of, as Richard Dawkins put it in Ben Stein's film Expelled, a signature of intelligence. And so they think, well, maybe there was an intelligence in outer space that designed life and then seeded it here to Earth. So it arose in a more friendly environment with the help of an intelligent designer. Ben Stein called that the ABG theory, anything but God. And of course, it just kicks the problem of the origin of information out into, it doesn't kick it down the road, it kicks it out into space without ever solving where you get information in the first place. Also, those aliens,
that's so great.
Those aliens wouldn't explain the origin of the universe, or the fine-tuning of the universe, which provides evidence of design from the very beginning of the universe. No being within the cosmos could explain the origin of the cosmos itself, or the fine-tuning that allegedly made its later evolution possible. So it's not a very good explanation.
Great point. All right, so your book, one of your books, Return to the God Hypothesis, turned into this movie, TheStoryOfEverything.Film. What is the number one thing that you want people to get across, with this movie?
Yeah, that it's a new day in science, that there are 3 major discoveries that are pointing to God. The first is that the universe had a beginning. The second is that from the beginning, the universe was fine-tuned against all odds to make life possible. And then thirdly, that within the living cell, we have discovered an exquisite realm of digital and nanotechnology, and everything we know about the origin of information, whether we're talking about software or hieroglyphic inscription or a paragraph in a book, suggests that information always comes from a mind. And so the discovery of information embedded in the DNA molecule in even the smallest cells, in fact, in every cell in every living organism, suggests that a mind played a crucial role in the origin of life, that we are looking at evidence of a master programmer. And so this is evidence that science itself is revealing, that's pointing to God. And the film tells the story of those discoveries, and tells the story of the scientists who have changed their mind about the atheism-theism question, about the God question, and have become more theistic, God-friendly because of, not in spite of, scientific evidence. The gentleman you just saw on the screen there was the great cosmologist Alan Sandage, whom I heard as a young scientist early in my career at a conference, in describing the evidence we have for the beginning of the universe. He said, and we found this footage, it's in the film, he said, here is evidence for what can only be described as a supernatural event. There's no way this could have been predicted within the realm of physics as we know it. And so there's just fascinating stories of discovery. The film is beautifully animated, and we also then tell the story of the scientists who've made those discoveries and how those discoveries have changed the worldview of the scientists involved. I think the producers did an absolutely fabulous job on this film, and it greatly honors me because it's a film adaptation of my book, Return to the God Hypothesis. But it's, I would say, probably, if anything, much more accessible being converted into the film language, and I think people will really enjoy it.
Yes. Oh, that's great. Well, first of all, good on those scientists for having the courage and the humility to admit everything we've talked about here, but also for you for putting it out there, for giving them something to see. The story of everything.
One of those scientists, by the way, was Albert Einstein. He didn't come to full religious belief, but he came to the belief that there had to be a mind behind the universe, and he rejected his earlier rejection of the idea that the universe had a beginning, and later said that was the biggest blunder of his life, that he did not allow the evidence to speak and point him in the right direction. He tried to gerrymander his own equations to avoid the impression of a beginning to the universe.
Watch it with your Darwin supporting and atheist friends. TheStoryOfEverything.Film, and then go buy the book too, Return of the God Hypothesis, the great Dr. Stephen Meyer. Dr. Meyer, wonderful to talk to you. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, great to see you again and to be on with you.
Yes, sir. I hope we can do it again. Mike Slater, First TV, spread the word.